A few weeks ago, we had a gentleman on who actually converted from Islam to Christianity. Take a listen.
We were taught Islam was a peaceful religion, but just as he's saying, when you open up the Quran and instead of being told what to think about what's in there, you read it for yourself, you find that there are peaceful statements in the Quran, certainly, but as you progress through the Quran chronologically to the later portions, which tend to take precedence over the earlier portions, they get more and more violent. The most violent chapter of the Quran is the last chapter of the Quran to have been composed, chapter 9. This is the chapter that says, slay the infidels wherever you find them. The chapter that says, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay the jizya and feel humiliated.
There are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world and 2.2 billion Christians as of now. But by the year 2050, it's estimated that there will be nearly 2.8 billion Muslims and 2.9 billion Christians. So it's starting to even out. And Islam will be the second biggest religion in the USA, and it is growing very, very quickly right now. Joining me now to weigh in on this is Brigitte Gabriel, president of Act for America. Also here in studio with me is Oz Sultan. He's a counterterrorism consultant, and he is also a proud Muslim who is conservative. And we also have the regular, who's with me all the time, Jonathan Gilliam. He is a former FBI special agent and Navy SEAL. Okay, so I'm going to start off with you, Oz. You and I have had multiple conversations on this set when the commercials come.
Right.
And we talk about the fact that you say that most people in America don't really understand Islam.
Well, the challenge that you have is you've got three major segments of the religion. You've got Sunnis, Shias, and Sufis inside of the country. You've got about 4 million Muslims in the United States today, law-abiding citizens, right? Contributing to the economy. 10% of your doctors in the United States are Muslims. You know, there's big numbers out there, and they're better assimilated, they're better integrated than they are than their European counterparts because they came here leaving countries they did not want to be in. The thing I think we have to look at is how can we better have a conversation with Muslims that are already in the country so that they become as integrated in the future as the Irish, the Italians, and their predecessors that came before them.
The problem, I guess, I have with that is that when you that gentleman who is on, who we just played the sound from, his name eludes me, but he said that the last chapter in the Quran, many verses in the Quran, call for violence. I mean, deep, dark violence.
If you look at all three of the Abrahamic religious books, right, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, there are phrases of these sorts that are oftentimes taken out of context by people not necessarily looking at it as reading liturgy. You don't read religious books inside of our purview, really, and say, hey, we're just cherry-picking certain things just to go after things. It is a narrative, and there's different ways that folks have taken a look at how you're transliterating the spoken word into action in reality. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's violent, nor does it mean that it espouses violence. These are things that are speaking to things that took place historically that don't necessarily apply today.
Gabrielle, do you have something to say about that?
Oh, yes, I respectfully do not agree with your guest because the difference between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism is in Christianity and Judaism, there is nothing that sanctions the killing of innocent people. For example, in the Quran, there is the law of an-nasakh wal-mansukh, the law of abrogation. If there are two verses in the Quran contradicting each other, the latter verse wipes the first verse and the latter verse becomes the law.
That's not how it's
exactly why
works.
When moderates and radicals get into a debate together, the radicals always win the debate because the law is on their side. That is the difference. Actually, Prophet Muhammad himself sanctioned killing, sanctioned subjugation of infidels. Jesus called for forgiveness. Whoever slaps you on one cheek, you turn the other. Christianity is all about forgiveness. Islam is very different.
Islam is as much about forgiveness as Christianity is, and saying things like that where you're basically giving a law on the translation and how people should practice Islam when you don't even practice is ridiculous, okay? I hear things like this all the time, and they're just absolute bubkiss because the way...
University, where it is the highest authority of Islam in the world, and Al-Azhar University sanctions that.
Brigitte, just let Oz finish his statement, then I'll come back to you. We're going to get Jonathan.
Al-Azhar University is not the highest religious institution in the world, and Islam is practiced as a decentralized religion. We don't have a pope, per se.
No,
so what we do have is a tradition of looking at hadith, which are the framework for how you interpret the Quran. I mean, there are more mentions of Mary Magdalene in the Quran than there are in the Bible. There's tons of mentions of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, okay? There is more bringing these religions together than there is pushing them apart. What we do have is a narrative of terrorists that have tried to hijack the religion for one aim: anarchy. Okay, if you look at ISIS, if you look at the terrorism that's coming from Jamaat Islamiyah, from Boko Haram.
Anarchy on what level?
Anarchy in the simple sense that they have still yet to push a platform. If you ask any of them, and that's what our foreign counterintelligence and our counterterrorism has done, they don't have a long-term plan. Their plan is basically to, with ISIS, it's to create a combative state in between the East and the West, catching Muslims in the middle. With Jamaat Islamiyah and Boko Haram and some of these other organizations, it's partially political, but they don't have fully stated aims.
Jonathan, weigh in.
Well, listen, this is, first off, this subject could go for an entire episode, no doubt about that. But I think despite my belief of how Islam evolved and Muhammad's, his fundamental teachings, how they changed as Muhammad grew and became more of a military and political leader, his belief structure became different, and the Quran reflects that, where he used the tactics that are being used now, the land grab and the movement of Islam. This is exactly the same way that it grew. The problem, I mean, we could talk about theology all day. The problem, though, that with Islam today is that you have progressive Muslims, which you are a progressive Muslim, whether you realize that or admit that or not, because Islam in its fundamental state is the way Muhammad utilized it and progressed it. And that is where the problem is that fundamentalists, the more religious you become in Islam, the more likely you have of potentially being recruited into a fundamentalist thinking.
That's incorrect. That's absolutely incorrect.
Because if you look at
let Gabrielle jump in. Gabrielle, what did you say? Say it again.
I said Jonathan is correct. He absolutely is correct. What the radicals, what ISIS is practicing today is exactly what Prophet Muhammad practiced. They are following in the footsteps of the Prophet.
That's incorrect, and that's absolutely ludicrous. ISIS is a cult. ISIS is simply a cult that has perverted not just the Quran, but the word of the Prophet Muhammad. They've perverted Hadith, and they're basically doing whatever they want, whenever they want.
Gabrielle, finish up.
They have not. I was born and raised in the Middle East. I lived in the Middle East most of my life. This is reality. The word jihad is mentioned in the Quran 40 times, 36 times out of 40 as a holy war against the infidel to either kill them or subjugate them. This is why you see minorities in the Middle East and throughout majority Islamic areas where Christians and Jews and Yazidis and everybody else is persecuted. And this has been going on for centuries, not just today.
I think, let me just say one thing. I don't like to be combative when I talk to a Muslim. I have talked to a lot of Muslims, and we've come to a realization about these things. To say that it's ludicrous that in itself is a little bit off the mark, because here's the reality of this, is that you don't see Muslims that are non-religious being recruited. You don't see people that...
But that's exactly what's happening with ISIS recruitment right now.
But see, here's the problem. That when young people are inspired, when young people see what's going on and they're brought up with the Muslim beliefs, they're in a quandary. Do I believe the fundamental teachings, or do I just go on with what the world, the progressive Islam is telling me? And here's the thing. When Islam says what you say, that it's ludicrous, you are in fact missing the entire problem. And that's the biggest part of this, is that Islam themselves won't come to the table and say, we have an issue with the more religious somebody becomes, the more potential they have of being fundamentalized.
I think that's a very old way of looking at what's going on now, because ISIS is not practicing Islam the way Islam is laid out to be practiced. ISIS is practicing whatever they
that's
want.
the way it was.
Debatable.
laid
But look,
out.
we only have 2 minutes. I mean, I'm being mesmerized by everything that you guys are saying. Brigitte Gabrielle, I want to come back to you. I want to ask you a question. We have very little time left. How dangerous do you think it is that Islam is growing as fast as it is growing in the United States?
The danger is that radicalism is taking hold in the mosques in the United States, and the worry is that 7 out of 10 mosques are radicalized, preaching hatred and anti-democracy teachings. That's where the danger comes from, because they are being used as a recruiting tool to turn young American Muslims against America.
20 seconds.
You and I have had this discussion. We're launching a anti-terrorist report in May that I'm going to be releasing that explains what ISIS is versus what Islam is and how we can actually stop their radicalization process.
Go to the question. The question I asked was, how dangerous is it for Islam to be growing as fast as it is in America? Do you think it's a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. I think the challenge that you have is that, listen, we've got radicals overseas, and we've got to manage and maintain that. And the way you manage and maintain that is by engaging Muslim populations.
Jonathan contends that there is no difference between, there is no such thing as radical Islam. It's fundamentalism.
Fundamentalism. And it is a problem when any structure, whether it be religious or political, starts to grow at a rate that is uncontrollable, which Islam is growing, not just because the religion spreading, but because Islamic families are breeding and at a rapid rate. At a rapid rate. And the problem is that you have this fundamental difference between progressive Muslims and fundamental Muslims, and as that growth happens, so too will the fundamentalization.
I have to cut it off at that. Brigitte Gabrielle, thank you so much. You know what? I'm sitting here listening to this. I barely said anything. I said, okay, I'm going to have a 1-hour special on this. We'll be in contact with you very soon about having you back. Thank you, Brigitte Gabrielle. Thank you, I Assaulted. And thank you, Jonathan, as always. What do you think? Tell us what you think. Who did you agree with here? Send me an email at dmlreport@newsmax.com. That's dmlreport@newsmax.com. Or you can send it to me personally at theycometoamerica@gmail.com. Don't go away. We're going to be talking about the